Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Legore, and welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast right here at Skywatcher. If you've joined us before, thank you very much. Happy Friday. If you've never been with us before, happy Friday, and welcome to the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. If you like what you see here and you want to keep up with what's going on, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. We really appreciate it. If there's an episode that you want us to cover or a topic that you'd like us to cover, go ahead and email us at support@skywatcherusa.com. Title it What's Up so we know what's going on. But we're always looking for new ideas on episodes, and today was one of the more requested episodes that we do, and of course we are happy to oblige by that. So many of you are familiar with our Star Adventure tracking mount. It's been a very popular mount for several years now. I forgot how long we've been selling the Star Adventure. I have to go back and look. But it's been a really popular tracking mount for many years now. You see it in the photo industry a lot. I know Canon uses them, several prominent astrophotographers. You see it on Trevor Jones with Astro Backyard a lot. But they're all over the place. But at the end of last year, of 2020, we unveiled the next evolution of Star Adventure. And of course, that is the Star Adventure 2i. And there is some differences between the two, and over the last few months, as the Star Adventure 2i has been shipping and people have been getting them and all kinds of fun stuff, there's been some questions, and these tend to pop up regularly. So we thought, while people are also requesting an episode on the 2i, we thought it would be a good idea to finally sit down and actually do an in-depth view of the Star Adventure 2i so you get to know it a little bit more. I'm going to take you through some helpful tips and tricks on the Star Adventure that we've kind of learned over the last few months, that we feel like people should be aware of when you're buying one, or if you just got one, that could make your experience a little bit better with it. So that's what this episode's about. We're not really going to spend a ton of time talking about all the, this is how great it is. We're going to kind of let it speak for itself. So I'm going to tell you about the hardware, what it can do. We're going to go through the settings. And at the end, we're going to talk about some tips that I would recommend keeping an eye out for if you have a Star Adventure 2i, especially if you just got one. So we're going to go through all of that. And if you're just watching this after this has been recorded, hopefully this video is also helpful for you too. That's what this is all about. So, 2020. Crazy year. None of us want to repeat it. At the end of the 2020 in the fall, we came up, finally released the 2i version of the Star Adventure. This is basically just the evolution of Star Adventure. My face is kind of in the way, but really just looking at the mount right here. Anyway, so sorry about that. So this is the next evolution of Star Adventure. It started shipping fall of 2020, and really, it's the same mount and accessories many of you have been using for the last few years now. There's not a lot of change that has happened on the mount overall. It's still small, it still holds 11 pounds, it still has metal gearing, the motor's the same, gears are the same, polar scope's the same, the way it runs is the same, all that fun stuff is all the same stuff. So the fundamentals of the mount have not changed. And that was done on purpose. But with that is all the accessories like the deck bracket and the EQ wedge and all that fun stuff. All of that stuff still works. It all still applies. If you've already got a Star Adventure, maybe you're thinking of adding another one, and you're like, oh, I've already got a ton of accessories already, all that will still work. You don't need to go buy a bunch of extra stuff at that point. All the accessories still work. Ball head adapter, deck bracket, EQ wedge, counterweight kit, all of those accessories apply to the Star Adventure 2i as well, and they're completely cross-compatible with every other Star Adventure in the family, including the original and the mini. All that is cross-compatible. The big change with the Star Adventure 2i is it now has Wi-Fi on board, and this is very similar to the Star Adventure Mini, which some of you might own already. The Mini is very customizable because it has the ability to have the Wi-Fi control on the app. That control capability has now been applied to the Star Adventure, making it the 2i. Some of you might be familiar with the original Star Adventure in the advanced firmware that we had out there, which allowed you to hook up the Star Adventure and program a bunch of stuff into it to make it more customizable for certain rates and all kinds of stuff. That no longer applies because that feature is basically built in with the app and the Wi-Fi capability. And that's what we're going to break down a lot today. With this really customizable control capability, there's a lot of photographic features that have been added, particularly in the time-lapse arena. So we'll go into the different settings that each one of those allow. And I'll kind of break that down because there's actually some interesting ones there that you might be interested in learning about. So real quick, like I said, let's just go over the accessories. A lot of you probably have all this right now. You have the deck, there's the deck bracket, there's the EQ wedge, there's the ball head adapter. These are not to scale, by the way. Counterweight kit, and of course we have the tripod. All of this equipment is cross-compatible between the original and the 2i. So again, if you already have a lot of this stuff, don't worry about it. You can use it on a new one. You can just buy the head and you're good to go. Or you can buy a pro pack and it comes with everything, and now you've got 2 complete setups. But if you already have accessories for your Star Adventure, don't worry, the 2i perfectly accepts all of them, no problem. Now, let's talk about 2i hardware. The 2i has a lot of the same stuff. Like I said, we didn't change much. So let's just kind of go over the overview of the mount itself. So here's one side of it. This is the dial side of the Star Adventure. So of course we have the mode dial. This is one of the things that changed. If you have an old Star Adventure, you'll notice some of the tracking rates are not there anymore, and they have been replaced by other types of programming. So we're going to break down the entire dial mode by mode here shortly. But this is the mode dial. This is how you select or quickly select, and I'll go into details about that. How you quickly select what you want your Star Adventure to do. It's like a rotary dial on a phone. If you don't know what a rotary dial is, then this is what a rotary dial is. So this also lights up at night, unless it's in the off position, but at night when you rotate it to one of the tracking modes, there is a backlight LED, red LED, that will backlight whatever mode you're on so it's easy to see. So that is the mode dial. This black ring up here with the thumb knobs or thumb tabs, that's the right ascension clutch or the RA clutch. This is how you adjust everything. You have the polar scope. The polar scope I want to touch on really quickly. In the manual, when you get one, it talks about how you need to calibrate the polar scope. Unless it's a really rare situation, the polar scopes are already aligned to the center axis of the mount. You shouldn't need to mess with them at all. I know some want to use the dial on the back here, which I don't really talk about too much. You can do polar alignment or have an assistant with polar alignment with our app, and I'll go into the details for that. But you shouldn't have to mess with the polar scope reticle or the polar scope at all on a new mount. They are generally aligned unless for some rare case it's not. But check it. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have to mess with it. I would actually encourage that you don't mess with it. But that is the polar scope. And then the eyepiece on the back here is how you focus the polar scope. See these neural grip right here. You can actually rotate it right there. That's how you focus your polar scope. So there you go. But that's the only adjustment you should really have to do on your Star Adventure polar scope is focus it for your eyes. You shouldn't have to mess or calibrate the reticle. It is in the manual in case you need to do it, but it's not something you have to do on a new one generally. Now on the flip side, we have the arrow buttons. Now, last I checked, I believe they called these slew buttons, and that's kind of deceiving in a way because I have people write in, they're like, I turn on the Star Adventure, I hit the arrow button, and nothing happens. This is like a slow motion control adjustment for the right ascension. If you are using a telephoto lens or a telescope and you want to fine adjust the positioning and right ascension, the arrow buttons you would hold down, it speeds up the motor a little bit and allows you to finely position, rather than having to undo the clutch and jitter everything around, you can smoothly do it with the arrow buttons. I like to call them fine adjustment buttons. The Star Adventure is not made to move quickly. It's a lot like watching grass grow. It does one rotation every 24 hours. So if you get it and you're like, my mount's not working, if the red lights come on, it's probably working. So, but the arrow buttons right here, even though they do speed up the motor, it's not a lot. So you will need to be under some kind of magnification to actually see the movement there. So just an FYI. Right below that, you have the hemisphere switch. You have north and south. There is a stop position in there, but most of all, you really just want to worry about north and south. You know, if you're in the northern hemisphere, have it on the N. If you're on the southern hemisphere, you should be on the S. I'm in the northern hemisphere, so I have that switched to N. Just below that is the snap port. The snap port, now you may have read and you may have purchased the Star Adventure because 2i because you found that it can actually trigger your mount, or I'm sorry, your camera. And that is done with a snap cable. And this is a snap cable here for my Canon cameras. A snap cable, it's got various connectors depending on your camera configuration. This one is for a lot of the basic Canons, like the 60DA. I believe the EOS R has this position or type of connector. They're 2.1 millimeter pins. One of them plugs into the snap port, the other plugs into the camera. These are very particular to the camera company and the model of camera you have. I also have the 3-pin version for some of the larger pro cameras from Canon. They'll have a 3-pin, their proprietary 3-pin connector to a 2.1 millimeter. Now, if you are shooting, it's important if you want to connect your camera and take advantage of the mount triggering your camera, you're going to need a snap cable. Usually we have our own in stock for basic stuff like Canon and Nikon, but things are changing a lot with cameras. You know, there's Sony, Olympus, Fuji, Pentax, Canon, Nikon, you know, Leica. There's a million different cameras out there at this point, and each one of them is going to have its own little configuration for the cable. So I send a lot of people to Vello, VELLO, the shutter release cables, and there's been a camera yet that I have not been able to find a cable for. I'll put that in the chat right now. It's just VELLO, shutter release cables. Vello shutter release cables. So if you need a shutter release cable, you can get that from there. So those cables will work. Just find the cable that works for your camera. Make sure it's a 2.1 millimeter on one side. That'll plug into the snap port, and you're good to go. So that's all set there. Your camera does need to be in bulb mode to get that to work. Usually bulb mode is on your little thing up here, a little rotary or something on that. That's usually the B. If you don't know what bulb mode is, look it up in your camera manual and find out there. We also have a USB port, 5-volt USB. You can power the mount. This is also how you update the mount. If you want to do it, you can do it via Wi-Fi as well. I like doing a hardwired update just in case. But a USB port for powering the mount and firmware updates. Now, one thing I want to make clear on the Star Adventure is it pulls very little power. Usually up here under this black cover, I should have marked it. This is the AA battery pack that's built in. There they are. 4 AA batteries will run these for 72 hours depending on how cold it is. But it'll run it long enough to where you're set to go. So just remove the cap. There's the AA batteries. That's how I normally recommend people do it. Some people want to run it off of like those little battery chargers for your phone. But I haven't found a battery that works well. Problem is because a lot of these phone charger batteries, if they don't have enough power being pulled from them after a certain period of time, it shuts down. So Star Adventure doesn't pull that much power, so it will run for a while and then it will turn off, and people will call being like, my mount dies, it doesn't work. I recommend just using it with AA batteries and you're set for hours of use. Or if you're at home, get like a little phone charger and, run it off of AC if you really want to do that. Someone might have found a battery that works. It's just I have yet to find one that works, that doesn't automatically shut off because of the battery automatic shut off. Now we also have the last port here is the ST4 guide port. Not a lot of people use this. There's a handful of you out there that probably are. If you really want to push the Star Adventure to its absolute max capability, you can guide in Ride Ascension. If you are guiding, like with PhD2, you have to make sure that you turn deck guiding off because there is no deck to control with just Ride Ascension. This is really good if you're using longer focal length lenses like 200, 300, maybe 400. That's honestly about the max I would recommend on a Star Adventure is about max personally I would say 300 millimeter for good images, 400 millimeters a stretch. And if you're using something like a 150 to 600, like a Tamron or Sigma or Sony's 200 600s, you're really asking a lot from it when you're doing long exposure work. Excuse me. Great for eclipses, great for short exposures at like 500 and 600 millimeters, but if you want to do long, deep sky astrophotography at those focal lengths, you really need a bigger mount. The Star Adventure was really designed for wide field Milky Way work and travel. That's really what it's for. It can hold a 150 to 600, and it can track with one, but make sure you know where your expectations need to be when you're doing long exposures at that focal length. It's a small mount, and at 500 and 600 millimeters, that's a lot of focal length, a lot of magnification. So auto guiding can help at those longer focal lengths, but you're still going to hit the ceiling quickly if you have a big lens on it. And if you're thinking about putting like a 400 plus prime on these, please don't. That's a big expensive lens. Go get a bigger mount that's going to support something like that better. All right, now the biggest thing that happens on the Star Adventure 2i is the new modes that are programmed into it, and we're going to talk about those right now, the 2i modes. And modes can be adjusted by either the app, which we'll talk about here shortly, or the dial. And they do work with each other, and I'm going to explain that here in a little bit. But let's just go through the basic modes real quick. First off is the star mode. Star mode is your general tracking. You want to go out, you want to do Milky Way work, you want to do deep sky work, galaxies, nebulas, whatever. Star mode is what you really need to be. This is going to be probably 95% of what you're going to do with a Star Adventure is star mode. That's probably just going to be your default. So, just FYI, star mode, that's what you're going to be using pretty much all the time. The next one, of course, is sun mode. Sun mode is all the same settings for astrophotography. It's just the motor is now tracking at the rate of the sun, which is slightly different than sidereal mode or star mode. The rate is a little bit different. Odds are you're probably not going to do a lot of this unless you're doing an eclipse, or maybe you're at an outreach event or you're doing some solar imaging with a small solar telescope, set it to solar mode. I've done it on star mode too. I find both work just fine, but it's there if needed. And then of course we do the same thing with the moon. We have lunar mode, same thing. It just is the rate of the moon crossing the sky there, which is a little bit different than sidereal. So we have different settings to accommodate the major celestial objects in the sky. But odds are you're probably going to use star mode the most. I honestly never use the sun or lunar mode. Even if I'm observing the sun, I never use solar mode. I just put it to star mode, and that generally does a nice enough job for the short stuff that I'm going to be doing. So just an FYI. Now, originally, on the original Star Adventure, we had varying tracking rate speeds after lunar mode. Those are all gone now. A lot of that can actually be adjusted in the app, which we'll talk about here in a second. But on the dial, they've been replaced with a couple different new modes. The first one is this star mode with a couple arrows next to it. This comes right after lunar mode. This is Astro Timelapse mode. And this mode's really interesting when you really understand what it's doing. And I actually had to play with this a little bit more. I've done it a little bit, but haven't really gone out and tried it. But it's a really intriguing mode that some of you might actually really like. So how this works is you'd point your Star Adventure to the part of the sky that you want to shoot. And let's say you want to do a time lapse. Well, a big problem about doing, let's say like there's a comet in the field and you want to do a time lapse of the comet moving across the sky. Problem is, most time lapse photography is done where the mount is just tracking one particular position. But let's say you want to keep it right on a particular target. There's an object in the field and you want to get this thing moving through there. You can also do this with a foreground. Just understand it might blur, but it's really interesting. Let me explain this a little bit. So the way this mode works is first you're going to set up your start position. You're just going to point your optic wherever you want in the sky or whatever you want to photograph. Loosen the clutches, point it to where you want to be, and then lock it down, just like you would find anything else. At this point, you would then go to the app, and you would have to program whatever your settings are going to be. I'll talk about that here shortly when we get into the app, because a lot of this depends on the app. You can set how long. I'll just open it up real quick so we can all do this together. So here's the app. This is the Windows version of the app. It's also on iOS and Android, but here is the Windows version. So we want to do Astro Timelapse mode, but we need to program it first. So you go to Astro Timelapse mode. That opens up the window. First thing you want to do is set up your exposure. How long do I want the picture to be? Each picture. How long does the shutter need to be opened? Let's say 60 seconds. So there that is. And a lot of it's kind of interesting how we have this program. There's video time span, or how long you want the video to actually span, like how long of a time frame do you want the time lapse to occur for, or there's how long you want the physical video that the time lapse is going to be. Let me get my head out of the way so you guys can actually see. There we go. So here's the exposures. You can put whatever you want, 120 seconds. It's all in seconds. So let's say 60 seconds. You have video time span. This is how long you actually want the time lapse to document for. So I want a time lapse to cover an hour or whatever. And it's actually done in hours. So you'd have to choose 1.5 hours or whatever it comes out to be. Or if you want your video to be 3 minutes long, we want it to be 300 seconds, and then we want that video to be at a frame rate of, I don't know why it's showing up over here, but you can actually choose your frame rate. It's on my second monitor here, but usually 25 frames per second is what most videos need to be. At that point will calculate how many you want it to be. So we'll just say that. Go. There it is. So you can see right there, it calculated that, okay, at 60 seconds, we want the final video to be 5 minutes long or 300 seconds. At 25 frames per second, I need to take 7,500 pictures. It automatically figures that out for that. After that, you're going to pick up whatever your speed is going to be. I don't know why this is showing up on my second monitor here. It's not letting me drag it over there, but let me just go through it. So it defaults to sidereal rate, which is, SAR mode, you can do solar mode, you can do lunar mode, half sidereal, which is good for Milky Way work. If you have a foreground object, you probably want it to be in this speed, or 2x sidereal. I'm not really sure what you'd use that for, but we'll say sidereal mode, and then you hit run to apply this to the mount. So what is interesting about this is now the mount is going to track that position of sky. Bring my web. I'm gonna actually show this real quick because this is interesting right here on how this mount does it. So I'm just blow myself up. There we go. So the way this is going to work is, so let's say we're going to point the mount off that way. So the mount is now going to track for that period of time. And once it knows that that exposure time is done, it then rewinds back to the start position and then starts over for the next shot. And after every picture, it's going to rewind back to that position. And basically what that's going to allow you to do is get those really deep pinpoint star, Milky Way, night sky shots. But every frame is going to look like you took this really long exposure, but everything's going to be pinpoint. But you're still on the same spot. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I would definitely take the time to experiment with this mode. It takes some time getting used to, but it's a really interesting mode. So next we have RT. RT is regular time-lapse mode. Basically, this is for daytime use. If you want to use the tracker to trigger a mount for time-lapse, which a lot of times you don't need to now because cameras have a built-in time-lapse mode, but if you want to, you could leave the Star Adventurer there on the tripod, let the mount move, and you can actually tell it how long you want to trigger this for. Let's go back here. Here's regular time-lapse mode. So in this mode, and my head's in the way, I'm sorry. Go. In this mode, you can program everything that you want it to do. So usually you're going to have your camera in like manual mode at this point. The exposures are less than 30 seconds for something like this because it's daytime work. Usually it's multiple, something of a second, like 1/300th or something crazy fast. It's the same thing. We can then take, how long do I want the video to be? I want it to be an hour. So 1 hour is how long I want that video to be. You can pick your frame rate, so 25 frames. You can pick how many photos you want it to do. There's a ton of stuff you can customize with this. And then, of course, what's interesting about the Star Adventure is it's not a normal time lapse where it just triggers it like an intervalometer and goes. You can do that and it'll just stay there. Or if you want to add some, variety to your time lapse, you can actually adjust the swing range where it will actually pan a certain degree, a set of degrees. So let's say we wanted to do 180 degrees. We wanted to do that once, and you can actually pick what direction you want it to go by, flipping the switches here. But basically what this will do is we're going to have our mount do whatever our exposure time on our camera is going to be. It's going to do it 25 frames per second, so it'll calculate what it needs to do there. And it's going to do that for an hour. So it's going to take pictures for an hour, and it's going to do that in a 180 degree arc. So that time lapse is going to now program the mount to pan 180 degrees in an hour, and it's going to figure out how many pictures it needs to do at whatever your frame rate is. And then it gives you this cool panning time-lapse look to it. I'm going to try to find an example of that here. I should have had this up earlier, but it's just something I thought of just a minute ago. I've done this before at some of my outreach events. I've shown you guys this before too. Here we go. This is a night version. That's not what I wanted. So this is what I'm talking about, a panning time lapse, which is kind of neat. Obviously this wasn't long exposure stuff because as the night got dark enough, we couldn't see it anymore. But you can see how dynamic that adds to your time lapse, where you're getting this movement, and it works really cool during the day. I have done some daytime exposure work on that, but you can that gives you an idea of what it actually does at that point. So it's really kind of neat that you can get this level added to your time-lapse sequences. So kind of an interesting thing to try out. So that's what daytime or RT mode, regular time-lapse, that's what I'm talking about with something like that. Kind of a cool thing to mess with during the day. Again, all these I would recommend experimenting with. They take some time to get used to. Now, we have expanded upon that, so we have done the LT mode, which is long exposure time lapse, and this is for generally 30 seconds and longer. It's the same concept, but what happens is with this mode, the exposures need to be longer. So what the mount has to do is it's got to pan and then stop, so it'll take in all the light for that exposure. And then when the exposure is done, it then moves to the next position, takes a picture. When the exposure is done, it moves again. And it allows the mount to stop tracking during these long exposure modes. Unlike astrophotography time-lapse, where the mount is actually tracking, for this mode, it's just a regular panning time-lapse, but it knows that it needs to stop moving for those increments when the shutter is open. So that way your foreground isn't going to blur during your time-lapse, because as the mount's moving, if it's taking a long exposure, it's going to pan through and do all that weird stuff to your picture. So it actually stops, exposes, moves, stops, blah, 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 blah. So it's really kind of interesting. Your camera does have to be on bulb mode, or the B mode on your dial, to engage this mode. And again, all this, bringing up the app again, all this is programmable in the same thing, long exposure mode. You just now can actually program how many seconds you want it to be. So kind of a cool one to mess with at that point. But again, all these time-lapse modes are really neat, but I would definitely recommend you experiment with them, because it does take a little bit of time to become familiar with how they work. Now the last mode is app mode. And app mode is basically, if you want to turn the Wi-Fi on and you want to connect to the app and program everything, you go to app mode. And you can do everything you just did on the dial in app mode. And this is what allows you to program everything. So app mode isn't really a tracking mode, it's just how you turn the Wi-Fi on and connect to the app and stuff like that. So those are all the modes on the dial. So some really cool stuff in there that you can really experiment with. Now let's talk about the Wi-Fi control here real quick. Again, the Star Adventure 2i is extremely customizable. Everything can be programmed, and that's done through the app. The ability that we're able to connect to it, program everything on the fly, and then apply that. Obviously, you can adjust your camera. It's like an intervalometer. You can adjust how many pictures and how long you want it to shoot. ISO, or the camera sensitivity, is done on the camera body, not the mount. Again, this has come up before. The cameras, if you want to take advantage of this, are triggered through the shutter release cables. You have to have a cable for this to control the camera. It cannot do it via Wi-Fi. I've had some people get confused on that. You can program sequences, time lapses, but one thing that people get confused with is the Star Adventure is not a go-to mount. That'd be cool, wouldn't it? how cool would it be to have us go to Star Adventure? If you want to see that, let us know in the chat if you would want to go to Star Adventure. We'll have to take a look at that. But the Wi-Fi control does not allow you to point or connect it with like a planetarium app and move it or anything like that. It's just for camera control and setting up the sequences. So I had some people get confused on that. So it's just for connecting the app and programming the mount. No positioning. There's no other app you can connect it to control positioning. It's not made for that. Now, one thing I want to kind of dig into is, like I said before, it's very customizable, and I want to take a second to kind of understand what the 2i is and how you should approach it as a mount, because it is a little different than the original one, and some people get confused. So again, the 2i is completely customizable. It relies on the app to program the settings. And what I mean by that is whatever settings you have programmed in the app and you hit run. So let me bring up the app again real quick. This is important. This is the stuff I really wanted to get into this video, is kind of the nitty-gritty of all of it. So let's go to astrophotography mode and let's set up a sequence. So we're going to do 60-second exposures. We're going to do a 5-second delay between each photo. And we're going to do that for 30 pictures at sidereal rate. And we're not going to worry about dither right now. The mount can dither. Dithering means it will move X amount, so you can actually, each picture will move and shift. So when you stack, it gets rid of a bunch of noise in your pictures. This is really customizable depending on your optics and focal length. So I don't really have a crash course into dithering. You just kind of have to be well aware of like your image scale and how much you want it to shift. So you have to mess with that too. So this is what we want to do. And then what we want to do is hit run right up here. And when we hit run, this setting or these sequences get applied to the mount. Now, if you're in astrophotography mode and you hit run, this 60 seconds, 5-second interval, 30 exposures gets applied to the star mode, the sun mode, and the lunar mode. So when you flip to those modes on the dial, this is the settings that are being applied to the mount. And anytime you go back to this, like let's say you haven't programmed the app, you haven't done anything to it, let's say you open it out of the box, whatever has been pre-programmed already is in here already. So if you switch this to star mode, whatever has been programmed in there already is what it's going to do. So if you want to change that, you have to go switch it to app mode, connect the app to the Wi-Fi, program whatever it is you want to do, and then hit run to apply it, and then it saves it to the mount. So the dial is kind of like a quick way to get to your pre-programmed settings. But if you don't like those settings and you need to change it, you need to switch to app mode and reprogram it. So someone did mention in the chat, if you hit run, it will disconnect to the Wi-Fi. I'm going to show you in a second how we actually fix that. So, again, the mode dial, this confuses a lot of people, especially on a new mount. And we have a whole section on this. We got to speed up here in a little bit. Really in-depth episode right here. The mode dial goes off of the settings that have been programmed into the mount. So if you don't like those settings, especially when you get a new one, you don't like those settings, go in and change them. And I'm going to talk about the most common ones that come up here in a little bit. So let's talk about the app a little bit. This is called Star Adventure Console. Now, Star Adventure Console runs the Star Adventure 2i as well as Star Adventure Mini. They both work the same way. It's just the Mini does not have the dial. or the payload capacity. It is available on Android, iOS, and Windows. I'm sorry I don't have something for Mac. I would love us to have a Mac support, hopefully soon. So we'll see. But you can get it on all these devices. It works all the same way on all three of them. This app is needed to program your Star Adventurer. Period. Whether it's on any of these devices, if you want to change any of that, you are going to need the app to do it. Now, the section I really want to get into really quick here is the tips. These are things that I, working in tech support since we released them out, have come up weekly, almost daily, and it's something I just wanted to hit on right off and really nail this down because it comes up a lot. So these are the questions that we find in support that come up, and a lot of people want to know about it. So I'm going to put these out there. Number one, how do I convert my original Star Adventurer to a 2i? Do I have to buy a 2i when I already have a Star Adventurer? No. We do conversions. I've done like 4 of them this week already. We can take an older Star Adventurer, a Gen 1 Star Adventurer, and we can upgrade it to a 2i. There is a fee for that. It's a little over $100 right now. I didn't put it in officially put the price tag in here because things change, part prices change. So if down the road someone wants to do it and the prices change, I don't want to put that in writing right here. So we can convert your original Star Adventure to a 2i version. It's very easy. It does have to be sent in because we do have to open it up and switch some electronics out, but we can do it. If you want to do this, please check with our support department for pricing and turnaround times. You know, it varies. We generally keep the parts on hand to do this. Like I said, I've done like 3 or 4 of these this week already. They're pretty quick. It's not that expensive to get it done. You have to pay shipping to and from, and then for the hardware and stuff to do it, but it's not that expensive. It is cheaper than buying a whole. It's a lot cheaper than buying a whole new mount. We'll say that. One thing I do want to mention though, if you have an older Star Adventure that's has a red housing or a black housing, the 2i only comes in white. That's it. So when we do the conversion, we take the whole lower housing here because it's branded with the Wi-Fi and the 2i naming convention down there. We replace the lower housing to mount the new motor board in there that has the Wi-Fi signals and stuff or Wi-Fi emitters and stuff on there. So if you have a red or black mount, please be advised that when you get it back, it will have a white lower housing. That is the option. There is no option. That is what you get. So it hasn't been a problem. Just wanted to let people know if you got an older mount. But we can do conversions. It's quick, easy, no big deal. My Star Adventure 2i stops tracking. I just got it and it just stops tracking. I think it's broken. Happens all the time. And this is a big thing I wanted to do in this video because this relates back to the app and the programming. So when you get a new Star Adventure, it has preset settings from the factory. They've been programmed at the factory. So when you get it, you can turn the dial on and it will track for a little bit, but then it's going to stop. And people call and they freak out and they think everything's broken. It's not. At least 99% sure it's not. On a rare occasion, I guess something could happen, but most of the time it's not. No problem. You have to remember that when a sequence or a set of settings is programmed into the app, when the mount completes that sequence, it stops tracking and it's ready for whatever we're going to be doing next. So what you're seeing, if you have a new Star Adventure 2i and it stops tracking, odds are it has completed the pre-programmed sequence that was in the mount. So this is what I'm saying is you have to want to go back in there and you need to change some settings on a new Star Adventure. So when you get your new Star Adventure, you want to make sure you go in and reprogram the settings to whatever you want to be. So here's what I'm talking about. So I don't know what the exposure and interval in photos are. It's like a half hour is what it equates to. But I don't remember what the settings are. So I've cleared them out. But the big thing is if you don't want your mount to stop tracking, let's just say you want to use it as a tracker. I don't care what the intervals are. I'm not really interested in connecting my camera at the moment. I just want it to track. When I flip it to star mode, I just want it to go and continuously track. You need to switch it to app mode, so the Wi-Fi is on. Connect your app to it. Go to astrophotography mode. And then whatever you want in there, if you're going to control the camera with it, you can put whatever your exposure is, whatever your interval is. Make sure it's on sidereal tracking if you want it to track the stars correctly. But this little check mark, the blue check mark, is what you want. How many photos it's going to do, because once it's completed that sequence, it's done. It's going to stop tracking. We don't want it to do that. So this is defaulted to on currently. I don't know why. We've actually asked the factory and the engineers to not default it on, so it just tracks. But right now, if you have a new one or you're getting one, odds are this is what's programmed in there. Go to astrophotography mode, locate that blue check mark, and uncheck it. So now you see that it goes to infinity. And that means no matter how long the exposure is or how many intervals, it's just going to keep going. And then once it's done, hit run to apply those settings. And once that's done, anytime you move to star mode, the mount will just track normally until you turn it off or the batteries die or whatever. But that's generally, if you have a new mount and it stops tracking, that's why. So again, you can go back and watch this to change that. This applies to star, sun, and lunar mode on the dial. So anything in astrophotography mode applies to those three settings. Another one, my Wi-Fi turns off. When you hit run and you do a sequence, we have the mount currently set to where it will turn the Wi-Fi off to conserve power. But that also means that it's kind of difficult for you to get back into it. You have to turn the mount off, then back on to turn the Wi-Fi back on again so you can access the mount until the sequence is finished. If you don't want to do that, you need to turn this switch off. So again, under astrophotography mode, it says Wi-Fi off on run. This is defaulted to on. So when you hit run and the sequence starts, it turns the Wi-Fi off to conserve the battery power because it's going to probably run for a few hours. You don't really need that extra power being drained for no reason. But if you want the Wi-Fi to stay on, find this switch and turn that off. And then the Wi-Fi will just continuously stay on. So hopefully that's helpful. Saving sequences. This is kind of cool. We're almost finished. Now, if you have a set, like let's say you want to shoot this object and you really like the sequence that you did. It worked out really well. So I was doing 120 seconds, 5-second interval delays between each picture. And I did that for 30. And I really liked how this worked out for this one period of place in the sky. And I want to change that. Or I really like it, but I want to go shoot something else now. So can I save it? The answer is yes. So you can save your sequence settings, so that way if you ever want to go back and just, quickly load that, you can name it. You just press this plus button right here. You can go ahead and name whatever the sequence is going to be and save it, and then it saves it down here to the naming convention that you did. And then anytime you want to reload that, you just click that, it loads it back up here into the astrophotography mode, hit run, it then applies that, you're good to go again. So kind of a quick, easy way to save your sequences there. So kind of some cool stuff in there. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the Star Adventure 2i. If you have any questions, now's the time to go ahead and ask. I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my abilities. If you like this and you want to keep up with what we're doing here at the What's Up Webcast, go ahead and subscribe. It supports the channel. We definitely appreciate that. Next week, we're going to be talking about the upcoming lunar eclipse on the 26th. I will be doing a live stream, weather permitting. We're going to talk about that as well if you want to watch it. But we're going to talk about how to do imaging of the lunar eclipse. I will mention right now that next week I have a family thing I need to do, so next week's episode will actually not be live. We will have a video. It will release at 10 a.m. exact same time. There will be a chat. We'll have moderators in here. It just won't be me live, so if you're asking me a question directly, I won't be here to answer that. So just a heads up that next week's episode won't be live like we normally do it. It will be pre-recorded, but at least we won't skip a week. So that's what we're talking about next week. But if you have any questions, now's the time to ask. That's pretty much all I've got on the Star Adventurer 2i. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me just go through and see. Oh, yes. One real quick thing. Next Tuesday, we are actually going to be recording our special guest episode for the end of June. That is Brother Guy. He's the head of the Vatican Observatory. So if you have questions that you would like us to ask him, please email to support@skywatcherusa.com. Again, we're recording that next Tuesday. So if you have a question for Brother Guy, who's the head of the Vatican Observatory, please get those questions into us as soon as possible, and then we can apply or have those a list of those when we interview him next Tuesday. Again, because of the time difference, he's in Italy right now. We have to pre-record it, and that will air on the last Friday of June. So just a heads up on that. Now let's go through questions. If we connect the Wi-Fi or disconnect the Wi-Fi, is the Star Adventure still run on the program we selected? Yes. If you don't use the Wi-Fi and you have the modes already programmed, you can just switch to whatever mode you want, and it will apply whatever the last set of settings were. The mount can work without Wi-Fi. It doesn't need to rely on the app. The app is the only time it needs to rely on the app is if you want to change or program some kind of setting. That's it. If you have that programmed the way you want it, then you don't need to mess with the Wi-Fi at that point. Let's see. Will the USB connection capability will ever be USB connection capabilities like there is for the Wi-Fi? You can connect the Star Adventurer to a PC with USB right now. Let me bring up the app here real quick. If you want to connect your Star Adventurer and you don't want to use Wi-Fi, let me see how I did this. Yeah, so first off, you want to open the app. This is only on the Windows version. It's not on the other ones. So you go to Settings, click Settings. You do need to have your mount connected via USB to the computer. USB right there. You'd have to connect it with a USB cable. You're going to go ahead and plug that in. Your mount should hear doo-doo. When it connects up, it will power the mount on when you turn it to like star mode or something. And then you have to pick the COM port that's located in. This will have a drop down of the different COM ports that it sees, and you just have to find which one your Star Adventure is on. Also, it won't be defaulted to. It says use serial port. Flip that switch on. That'll open up the USB connections, and then you can connect to your mount that way and program it from your computer if you want to do that. So you can also switch this to night mode if you want to, and it switches it to night mode, which is really helpful if you're in the field at night. You can do that on the cell phone apps too. So let's see. Next, sometimes running this in the wilderness, I don't want to bring a Wi-Fi router to make a network. USB from a laptop will work great. You don't need internet connection or a router to connect to it. The mount emits its own Wi-Fi signal. So when you turn it on to app mode, it emits its own Wi-Fi signal. So if you're in the middle of nowhere and it's on app mode, there'll be one Wi-Fi signal that pops up. It just says SYNSCAN blah, 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 blah. Connect to that, and you're now connected. So just because something has Wi-Fi on it does not mean it's relying on the internet to do anything. It's just emitting a Wi-Fi signal. So there's no need for a router or anything. You can be in the middle of nowhere and still connect to the mount's Wi-Fi capabilities and program whatever you want. So or you can program it via USB before you go, or there. Next question. I have a Skywatcher Star Adventure. I'm in the UK. Can I get modified 2i here? I don't know. You might want to talk to the retailers out in the UK and see if they offer the upgrades. I'm not sure how they're doing it. It's something we do here in North America. It's really easy to do, so anybody who's done a Star Adventure or repair should know how to do it, but that's something you want to consult with your local dealer or supplier in your region about. I can only talk about the US and Canada currently for doing upgrades, because that's where we oversee all that. Next question. Does Windows app over USB work on the old Star Adventure or only the 2i? You can install the advanced firmware in the old version, and then you have to download this Windows control system to do it, and then you can program it. So there's a way to do it, but it's kind of a roundabout way of getting it to do it. Where if you just upgrade to a 2i, it makes it really clean and easy to do it, and it gives you more control over what you want to do. So you could install the advanced firmware. It's a little hard to find. It's on the skywatcher.com website, the global website. They kind of have it buried under the Star Adventure page. But there's a way to do all that with an original one. It's just not a clean and easy way to do it like the 2i is. That's why the 2i actually exists, is it makes it easier for you to customize and do all that, rather than having to go through all this crazy stuff and find this and put this firmware in there. You can just do it right off the bat with a 2i, with either the app or, a USB. But the older version, you have to have a Windows PC to do it. It will not do it via the app because it doesn't have the Wi-Fi connection capability on there, and there's no way to do it without upgrading it. So hopefully that answers everyone's questions. I think we got everybody. It looks like we've answered all the major questions. Hopefully this was helpful for everyone. Really appreciate everyone being here this morning. Hope you have a great weekend. Real quick, if you do want some cool swag to go with your Skywatcher stuff, we do have skywatcherthreadless.com. We have a Star Adventure 2i, it's Star Adventure. We should put 2i in there, I guess. But we have shirts and hoodies if you want to match your stuff. But we have the swag store for all of that fun stuff in there. So go ahead and check that out if you want to do that. So that's pretty much it. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a great weekend. It's a dark weekend, a very thin crescent moon. So if you've got a Star Adventure, time to get them out and start shooting some pictures. Again, next week we're talking about the lunar eclipse. It will not be live, but it will air at 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. And once again, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great weekend. Clear skies, everyone, and take care. Bye.